Hopefully that sound means you know where you're at and you're happy to be back. This is Guardians of the Future. I'm Justin Lada. I know it's been a while, but hey, as I say all the time, recording 2 podcasts is a lot of work, especially when it's not your full-time job. And we'll do that. I always say we'll do this as time allows. And obviously we have big news to talk about. If you have been living under a rock, the Guardians won the lottery. They won the draft lottery. I wish they would have won the lottery in other ways, I suppose, but you'll take what you can get. The Guardians own the number 1 pick in the 2024 draft, and here to talk about it with me today is Joe Werner, a self-published author of the Prospect Digest. You can also have seen him in the past at The Athletic, ESPN, Baseball Research Journal, the Bill James Handbook, Cleveland native, and great writer, and I always enjoy his thoughts on the draft in the minor leagues. So, Joe, thanks for joining in today.
Hey, Justin, thanks for having me. Look forward to the conversation.
Yeah, me too. So you want to give people anybody who may not know you or are familiar with your work, you want to give them a little bit of background? I mean, if you're watching on YouTube, I do have Joe's nice book up here, the 2023 Prospect Digest. You can find that on Amazon along with past copies that go back. I'm not sure how many years it goes back, Joe, but I have at least 2 other books on my bookshelf from you back there.
I think that is actually book number 9. And
wow.
As you and I were talking, I think this may be the last one. So this is book number 10. I figured that was a nice round number to kind of end on. But yeah, so as you kind of mentioned, I've been fortunate enough. I kind of stumbled into some pretty notable publications, both co-authoring and authoring. And over the past decade or so, I really kind of focused in on minor league baseball and prospect analysis.
Yeah, no one does it better than Joe because he's, like I said, he's a self-published author, and it's a lot of work to put in 20 prospects for 30 teams year in and year out, and not to mention doing all the draft stuff too, which is a lot of fun. And this is why we're going to talk drafts today, because obviously Cleveland's picking number 1 overall. They had 2.7% chance to win the number 1 pick in the lottery, and lo and behold, they came up and they got it. The Washington Nationals were supposed to pick first. That's how the lottery balls fell. But because they were not allowed to pick first because they're a revenue paying team, so they pay into the revenue sharing program for baseball, and those teams do not qualify to pick in the lottery back-to-back years, so they couldn't pick any earlier than 10th. And oddly enough, they were selected first, but they had to do a second draw and came up Cleveland. And the Reds are picking second, and they had like an even lesser chance to pick second because they actually finished the season with the winning record. They went 82-80, and they're picking second. So I'm going to say this is the lottery working. Oakland Athletics, and not to disparage Oakland Athletic fans here, because I do feel for them with the situation going on. I think it's awful, but that franchise, the way they're operating and what's happening, I can't say they deserve anything good to happen to them. So they're not going to pick first, even though they were one of the worst teams in baseball last year. I know the White Sox fans are probably mad. There's a bunch of teams that are mad that it worked out this way. But you know what? I'm going to say that this is the lottery working because it's supposed to disincentivize tanking, and Cleveland wasn't tanking last year. No, they didn't play the way everybody wanted to, or they thought they were going to. And the Reds were almost a playoff team, and they're picking second. So I don't know. Am I biased for saying that because we live in Cleveland that this is the lottery working, or is this actually working?
No, this is the lottery working. And I think there's usually, I know for the NBA with the lottery and everything, there's always the conspiracy theorists that say that it's rigged and everything like that. And, I don't think that there's any way. I mean, like you kind of mentioned, the ideal team basically would have been Oakland. They were terrible. And, and Cleveland, Cincinnati, both were kind of in it. Cleveland kind of faded down the stretch and whatnot, but at points they looked like they might do something, and then they just kind of fell back. So I think if you live in Ohio, it's a good day when both teams finish 1-2 in the lottery.
And I was excited. We were live streaming over at Locked On Guardians. If you're here listening to this, I assume you listen to Locked On Guardians. We were streaming during the whole thing going on. We were counting down the picks, and it was just like, okay, they were projected to pick 8th, and then the Mets didn't finish there, so they got bounced 10 picks because they were in the luxury tax, and then they didn't pick 7th, they didn't pick 6th, and I'm like, what is happening? Like they're jumping up 2 spots, and then they went to commercial, and then they're jumping up 5, and just as it kept going on that they weren't getting announced, I'm like, oh my God, are they going to pick number 1 overall? And they did. And the stories that came out on Baseball America and The Athletic from from Zach Meisel about how this all happened was just absolutely incredible. So yeah, great day. I mean, all things considered, I think the 2023 draft was probably the year you wanted to pick number 1 overall, because there were, I don't know, 3 to 5 guys, I think, depending on how you feel about the high school kids from that draft, that would have been, 1 overall picks most years. This draft doesn't seem like it's going to be like 2023, but I feel like it's still a pretty good draft. I guess it just depends on, how you want to spend the money. And I'll talk about a little about that too, and how you want to plan your draft and what you're good at developing. But Cleveland's got a chance at a very good player here. Even if this is not the 2023 draft, there are a lot of players that, I think are worthy of being number 1 overall picks in many years. Maybe not last year's. Like, I want to talk about Nick Kurtz and Travis Bazzana, and we could talk about JJ Weatherholt and some other guys. I don't know if those 3 would be number 1 overall picks in the 2023 draft if you placed them there, but I feel like 2023 is kind of an outlier, and these guys are still, I think, very worthy number 1 picks possibly.
Yeah, and I think not to kind of take a step back, but I think during the summer I took a pretty much a deep dive because I'm always fascinated on what kind of leads certain organizations into a specific way when it comes to drafting, and it always seemed like under Mike Elias in Baltimore, and then when it was David Stearns in Milwaukee, they always focused in on college bats, and they went college bats first round, second round, and it was the overwhelming majority of the time. And these are 2 farm systems, especially Baltimore, where, both teams really tend to hit on their picks early in the draft, especially taking college bats. So I took a kind of a similar deep dive for Cleveland, and specifically how things looked under Mike Chernoff. I think he was hired on at the end of 2015, so 2016 would have been his first. When I say hired on, I mean promoted to GM. 2016 would have been his first draft at that position, and there are a lot of interesting things that I came up with. Because I think it does kind of help paint a picture on maybe who they're targeting or what they're targeting, right? So since 2016, the Guardians have had 11 first-round picks, all right? They have gone under the recommended slot bonus 9 times on those picks. Bonus trivia question for you, Justin. Can you name the 2 guys they went over slot on? And I'll give you a hint. It was in the same draft. It was in the same first round.
Let's see. Since 2016.
Yep.
Wow, that's going to be tough.
I wouldn't have been able to get this.
Was it Daniel Espino? Was he one of them?
Nope.
Wow. I would have figured a prep kid would have been a prep kid. Bo Naylor?
Bo Naylor and Ethan Hankins.
Oh, because they had the comp. Yeah, that was Hankins was the comp pick that year. So they actually did go over okay. I didn't realize that. I feel like they've never gone full slot in the first round. So they went over slot in both those years?
Yep.
Or both those picks?
That was 2018. And then they went way under slot with Lenny Torres, who was, I think he was like the 35th overall pick or something like that. He was way at the back end of the first round.
Yeah, because they would have had a pick that year from the Carlos Santana signing, I think.
Yep. So, number 1, chances are they're going to go under slot again. And that's what most teams do anyways at the top of the draft. I also went back and took a look. There are several teams basically in a row that have gone under slot. And I think you and I as you were kind of setting this up, Spencer Torkelson is the last 1-1 that went at the recommended or slightly above the recommended slot bonus for the number 1 overall pick. And he just won $100,000 over the recommended slot. So again, I'm guessing, like you kind of said, it's not a real clear-cut number 1 player at this point. They're probably going to go under slot at this one, I would guess.
Yeah, I'd almost be sure of it. I mean, even the Orioles picked 1-1 in 2022. They went under slot. The Pirates have had number 1 pick overall. 2 of the last 3 years. They've gone under slot. Although I don't know how under slot they went on Paul Skeens. Paul Skeens last year has the highest first-round bonus of any player ever at $9.2 million. I don't think Cleveland's approaching that $9.2 million. And I know some people will jump and say that's a bad thing or it's the organization being cheap. And I'm not going to discourage anyone and say, like, you know, there's reasons to be frustrated with how this franchise spends money or whatever they do. Like, that's fine. You want to be mad at that and have reasons to gripe. I think there are reasons, and that's fine. I'm not going to tell anybody how to feel. But as I've been saying other places, that it's still okay to be invested and get excited about this number 1 overall pick and feel like it's going to be an impactful thing for them because, like you said, most teams do go under slot in the first round, and especially 1-1 overall, because you've got a large bonus pool available to you. So I saw, I think Carlos Colazo from Baseball America say that the team that was supposed to pick would have picked 9th last year, which is where Cleveland was projected to pick initially in this draft. If they would have picked number 1 last year, they would have added like 9 or 10 million to their bonus pool. Or maybe it was 4 million. I can't remember. Anyway, they would have, you know, added a huge amount to their bonus pool had they jumped to the number 1 pick. And that's what Cleveland did. So Cleveland's going to have a lot of money to play with in their bonus pool this year, probably over, I don't know. I'm not really sure what the totals are. They don't have them out yet, but they spent $10 million last year total. When you count the overages from rounds 11 on, because 11 through 20, you can only pay guys $150,000. And if you go over that, you are a percentage of that goes to against your overall bonus pool. And Cleveland did that a couple times, and they even gave Alex Moody, I think, $1 million in the 10th round, 9th round, which, you know, caused them to miss out on 2 other picks in the draft. But this is a team that spends the entire amount of their bonus pool allotted to them every year in the draft. This is where they spend money, and they better, because this is where they have to get things right. And it's imperative they get this right. Look, they're going to pick number 1 overall. They're going to pick 36 in the comp A round. They're going to pick 48 in the second round. And then after that, 3 through 10, they'll pick 10th overall based on record. It goes after that. But they've got a chance to get some really good players. And if you haven't listened elsewhere, as I've explained it, and Joe, maybe you have a little more insight into this, or you can correct me if I have something wrong here. But essentially, I go back to the Cam Collier thing from was Cam Collier 2022? Is that the right class?
Yeah, he was 2022.
So everybody kind of had Cam Collier like as a top 10 pick or top 15 pick, whatever. And he gets all the way down to where the Reds are. And I can't remember where he actually went, but it was kind of surprising maybe to some people that he fell where he did. And it felt like essentially what the Reds did was offered him a great bonus, and his advisor, because he was going into a junior college, he declared early, or he graduated high school early, and he could have shopped that bonus offer from the Reds around and say, hey, the Reds are offering whatever he ended up getting. Are you going to match that? Because if not, my client's not signing. And he fell and he fell and he fell, and he got to the Reds. The Reds gave him that bonus. So you can think of it as a way to trade down without trading picks, because you can't trade picks except for the comp round picks. So Cleveland can't trade the first overall pick if people think that. I know there's a lot of opinions out there. People think they can't. But essentially you can create a bonus demand for guys. You can say, we'll offer this player X amount of dollars. And if that player's advisor or agent calls other teams and says, hey, Cleveland's offering this, are you going to match it? Because if not, my client's not signing. Other teams say, well, we're not matching that. So they go to the next guy on their board, and that guy gets essentially, quote unquote, I would say, bought down to that pick. And I think that's what Cleveland has a chance to do here, not just picking a really good player at 1 overall, but 36, 48, wherever they, picking 10th in the 3rd round. You could potentially buy a player down the board. Does that sound roughly about the strategy here?
Yeah. I mean, Cincinnati gave Collier $5 million as, and the 18th, I think it was the 17th or 18th overall pick. And that's basically money that was like somewhere around I think number 9 or so, that value for that year. So there's definitely, we've seen teams go under slot and then just get very creative. The Astros made a living under Jeff Leno doing that. And they were, I don't know if they probably weren't the first, but they definitely popularized it. And I think the Guardians really have a chance to, they got four, like you said, four of the top 86 picks, and they got a ton of money. And so it'd be really interesting to see their approach.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, they're definitely not going to go full slot number one overall. That's very unlikely they're going to do that. And I think the long way of saying it is what I just said, is they're going to try to spread the money around. And they always tend to spread the money around, outside of 2018. Like you said, they went over on Bo Naylor and Ethan Hankins, which, one of those picks is working out. One is not really working out. But that's if you have a 50% hit rate in the draft, you're doing pretty good, even if that's a lot of money spent. So we'll see what their strategy is. I think that's what it'll be, is they'll have a lot of money to compete for a lot of picks. And you mostly see that in high school kids like Cam Collier. You see buying kids out of commitments lower in the draft. I don't think they're going to go prep number one overall at this point. Like, I don't know as much about the draft as you do, Joe, or as Willie Hood, who's usually on their side, or Jeff Ellis, who's my Locked On Guardians partner. I don't know that much about the draft. I know a little bit, enough to be dangerous, as I say, but it doesn't seem as of now, and high school always changes. Like, there's 7 months between now and the draft, and a lot of things could change. So a high school kid could always pop up late in the cycle. But I would say as of now, I don't see a high school kid as being the pick for Cleveland at 1-1, which is rare, because I was doing some digging myself, and I was looking, okay, when's the last time a high school outfielder or a college outfielder was 1 overall, which was last time a college first baseman was 1 overall. And I don't think a college first baseman's ever taken number 1 overall, because Spencer Torkelson was announced as a third baseman. And then I was looking at second baseman, because Travis Bazzana, who's in conversation at 1-1 as a second baseman, or JJ Weatherholt, those guys, not a lot of second basemen taking number 1 overall either. So this presents a very unique situation for Cleveland. I'm personally, and this is why I have it. If you're watching on YouTube, we have it: Nick Kurtz versus Travis Bazzana. To me right now, it's those two guys. Maybe you have a different opinion, Joe, but for me, I feel like as of now, as of December 12th, it's those two guys.
So I think you can make the argument for either one of them at this point. I think I'm probably going out on a limb, and I tend to do that. I get accused of doing that just to be an outlier, and that's certainly not the case. But I like Connor Griffin. I like the prep outfielder. I mean, I watched some BP and some game tape of him, and the ball just explodes off his bat. Like, it is an audible explosion. And, he's got a cannon for an arm. His swing is about as short and quick as you'd ever expect out of a teenager. And, I think the Indians, or the Guardians, I'm sorry, I'm still calling them Indians years later, but the Guardians, they tend to rely on their models quite a bit, or at least that's how it seems, especially when it comes to pitching. And Griffin reclassified. He was the top player for 2025, and he reclassified for 2024, which means he's only going to be, I didn't look at his birthday, but I'm assuming he's only going to be 17 at that time. And I don't know if you remember when Kansas City selected Bobby Witt Jr., and there was such a big discussion because he was 19 instead of 18 at the time of the draft. And a lot of people were poo-pooing that. And, so it kind of plays both ways. But, it's the same thing with Cam Collier. Cam went to reclassified basically, or graduated early, went to a JUCO, and he kind of manhandled the JUCO competition. And obviously, a 17-year-old who's already considered, a top 10 pick right now. I don't know. That's kind of my sleeper pick, so to speak.
So if there is a high school kid in play, you think it's Griffin. And I'm looking at his perfect game profile right now, and he's listed at 6'4", 210, and he will be 17 years and 17 months at the time of the draft when it comes around in July. He's an LSU commit, so it's going to take some money. My only argument against this is, I mean, high school player, you're right. They do rely on their models. He's going to be young for the class because he reclassified, and this is a kid looks like he's got a lot of tools, and it's a nice size for an outfielder. And the history of college picks 1-1, especially bats, is a little bit different. I mean, unless you've got like a Chris Bryant, and it's just 1-1 overall, like number one overall picks. It tends to be guys that are either high school pitch. It's either college pitching or it's a high school talent on the position player side. Historically, that's just the numbers bear that out. So it's a strange year. It could be a strange year, but you might have a point here. And I think you're right. Griffin makes a lot of sense. But my only thing is, if he's committed to LSU and he's young for the class and has a chance to be a really good player going to a very good program that just produced, one of the top picks in this past draft, and they're getting every player transferring to them besides, the guys that are going to Wake Forest. It's going to take a lot of money, and that could take away from their approach, maybe. Although the Orioles did go Jackson Holliday over Drew Jones in 2022, and I think they went under slot with that pick
by about $200,000, I think, on that one.
Okay, so that's not insignificant, but it's also not like massive savings. I am curious to see, like you said, Cleveland will probably go under slot 1-1. I'm curious to see how far under slot it goes at that point.
So I think it definitely under Chernoff, the Guardians they're kind of a wild card because they tend to be this conservative organization, right? They're very risk adverse, or at least that's kind of what it seems, based on some of the moves and everything. But if you look at the first round under Chernoff, that's really not the case, right? Again, of his 11 picks, right, he takes 2 high school catchers. That is, outside of young arms, that is the riskiest position that you're going to be taking in the opening round of the draft. It was Bo Naylor, and then I guess, we'll see if Rafi Velasquez actually stays behind the plate or not, but they did call him out as a catcher last year. And then they also grabbed 3 high school arms. So of the 11 picks under Chernoff, you have literally almost 50% of those have been the 2 riskiest groups, to draft and develop just because of the attrition rate and health and everything like that. So they're kind of difficult to pin down, just because as risk adverse as they seem to be, at least in the draft, they kind of push all their collective chips to the center of the table and kind of go all in on some riskier choices.
Yeah, you're definitely right. I mean, I feel like my other co-host Jeff usually points this out. They do tend to like what you would call unicorn type players, guys that, are hard to develop, or if they are developed properly, can become superstars. And, Cleveland has to find these players through the draft, like Daniel Spino, unicorn. It's a high school arm, special talent, but, very unusual profile considering his size and delivery. And obviously he's already underwent surgery. You can throw Hankins and Will Benson in that bucket. You could even throw Tristan McKenzie in that bucket, being a high school arm. I'm going to throw everything out from 2020. I know they picked Tucker and Burns, and the Logan Allen thing's working out. We'll see what happens with Petey, but I'm throwing everything from 2020 out the window because it was a weird year.
I think it's going to be one of those things that you probably can't start writing about it or looking into it now. But as I'm working through all the book, and I've done in the past too, you come across 2020 players all the time. And it, like you said, because COVID basically wrecked all of the high school season and limited college to 2 weeks worth of games or 2.5 weeks worth of games. The results are just, you either hit big or everybody just missed. And there's literally nothing in between. There's, and it is just one of those weird years.
Yeah, I'm throwing everything out from those years. I'm not going to hold that against anybody, and I'm not going to hold it against the players. It's not their fault either that happened. I'm not going to hold it against the teams either. I mean, I would even say, if you look at the other first round picks, like Gavin Williams, there were red flags there. Like, there were teams that didn't even have on their board in the first round because he had health concerns in college, and he didn't really have a long track record, which usually Cleveland doesn't go for either. And then you look at Chase DeLauder, another guy who comes from a small school, obviously had the Cape Cod League success, which is a huge part of their model, and he's young for the class, but a guy who didn't play a lot in college because he was hurt and comes from a small school. That's a very risky profile. And like you said, Ralphie Velasquez, also a very risky profile. I will say the difference with Bo Naylor, I feel like, is that they had, like you said, they announced him as a catcher, but he really wasn't a catcher on the amateur circuit. Like, he played a lot of infield, and there was talk before the draft, I remember, that he would move to catcher, and maybe a lot of people who, I mean, you probably know more than I do about this, that he was going to be a catcher in the pros, or they were going to try that. But I remember reading a lot about him playing third base and other positions as an amateur up in Canada, whereas Velasquez, I think, has just been a catcher straight through his entire college or entire high school career. And, the hope with Velasquez, I think, even if he doesn't stick at catcher, I think the hope is he hits too much to worry about keeping a catcher, because you want to move the bat faster than the glove. So maybe that's the thing there. But I seem to remember Naylor maybe being moved to catcher versus, I know they announced him as a catcher, but he necessarily maybe not all teams would have announced him that way.
Yeah, I think that even makes it more impressive of what he's done. What was it, 2 years ago when he hit, I think it was AA the first time, he barely hit his weight. And, that tends to be I always call it the true test, because that's usually, in my opinion, the most difficult level for a player to pass. And if they have some type of success there, the odds of them at least making the big leagues, depending on their age and performing, is usually pretty good. And he looked atrocious. And, there's a reason why, catching is so difficult, and even, the bar at the big leagues is so low to be a starting catcher, is because it's a grind and there's a lot to do. And, he was learning on the fly a lot. And it's just been fun to watch.
Yeah, and he was coming off that COVID year too. 2021 came right off the heels of the COVID year, so that was huge. A lot of people dropped him in the rankings that year. I'll go back to that, and I'll say I was willing to at least give him a mulligan on that. And I'm glad I did, because it made me look smarter than I actually am, that he ended up panning out. I did not drop him that far. So you're right. They do tend to surprise, and a college hitter at 1-1, I don't want to say it'd be safe, because, if there are risks involved. I mean, if you go back, I'm sure, because you were doing dives on history, I'm sure, like, you look at the history of number one overall picks being, the history of first round picks as a first baseman in general are just very low. Like, it's not good. Like, I think the best first baseman ever taken in the first round in the draft was like Frank Thomas. And that was, obviously many moons ago at this point. And you've got, your Mark McGuire's and Todd Helton, and there's Will Clark. Those guys are all good, but none of them went 1-1 overall. Like, Adrian Gonzalez went first overall in 2000, but he was a high school pick. You don't see a lot of college first basemen taking that high in the draft. I mean, yeah, Will Clark was taken number 2 overall in 85, but college baseball and baseball in general is very different now than it was in 1985. So hard to compare to that. And I don't know if you think Nick Kurtz can play some outfield or not. And then I'd have to go back. I mean, high school outfield, you're talking about Connor Griffin. I feel like high school outfield's probably a little bit more common. And then you have to draft to what the strength of the draft is, right? You can't just go back and look at history. You have to go and look at the history of or look at who's in the draft and decide who to take. But yeah, high school outfielders. I mean, you got Ken Griffey, who went in 87, a year that Cleveland could have picked number 1 overall because they had a horrible 86. But because they used to alternate between AL and NL picking number 1, Cleveland missed out on Ken Griffey that year. And then there's Bryce Harper in 2010, although he went to a JUCO and he was young, so there was that. But go back to 1980, Darryl Strawberry. So there's more examples of high school outfielders going number 1 overall. So your point about Connor Griffin, I think, definitely stands. I just wonder how much, I don't know, do you think that Kurtz or Bazana is a little bit safer? And how do you feel about those two players? And how do you feel about J.J. Weatherholt? And how do you feel about them versus the guy you think is right now a sleeper on the board in Connor Griffin?
So Weatherholt first, because he seems to be a popular name because he's a middle infielder, as is Bazana. But I think we all know how Cleveland tends to collect middle infielders like nobody's business. I'm a big proponent, and this is probably not going to come across the way I want it to. But I'm a big proponent of checking out the level of competition. And I know that Weatherholt hit like 450 or something in last year, but he's playing in the Big 12, and there's just, I don't know. He hit pretty well. I think he hit really well for Team USA the year before, but I watched the swing and I don't know. I don't know. I don't think he's going to be an impact bat. I think he's going to be a high floor, low ceiling type of guy that's probably going to move quickly. I think he had 16 home runs last year, but I think everybody and their mother, it seemed like, had a dozen or so home runs in college baseball last year. I'm not sure I believe fully in the power, and I think he's supposed to play shortstop this year. We'll see how that happens and if he can stick at shortstop. But, the question is that always comes down to, right, why you never pick a high school second baseman is because they're supposed to be the premium player on their team. The shortstop's supposed to be the premium player. So if they're second base, who is beating them out for shortstop? And I think that's an important question to ask for Weatherholt too. And I don't think he's as toolsy as, I know he ran quite a bit last year, still 16 bases, I think, or something like that. But you watch him run, I don't think he's a plus runner, so he's probably stuck, on the infield dirt. So, I think he's a safe pick, but he wouldn't be my guy for number one.
Yeah, I agree with you. I'm a little bit timid on Weatherholt, and I haven't seen him play other than watching some video clips on Twitter. I need to dig in. I will probably watch more college baseball this year than I've ever watched in my life, because obviously this is a unique opportunity for Cleveland, and I'm excited to learn more about these guys than I normally would. But yeah, I look at like the data on Weatherholt, and it's low. It doesn't strike out a lot, which obviously we know Cleveland prefers guys who don't strike out, and at the detriment of guys who hit the ball on the ground at 86 miles an hour. Unfortunately, a lot of times they love the ground ball to second, even if it means you're not striking out for whatever reason. But Weatherholt also doesn't walk. The walk rate is very low too, which is concerning. So that makes me feel like he's a very aggressive hitter, and that profile just tends to lend itself to very low outcomes. Like you said, he's a high ceiling, high floor, low ceiling player. So maybe things work out for him, but the approach just kind of scares me. I want to see a guy who walks a little more, who's a little more patient at the plate, because maybe that means that they've got a better approach. And I don't know how the pitching in Big 12 is. It doesn't sound like you feel like it's really good. I don't know how it is, but I feel like I don't know if it's any better than the ACC, because I mean, I've watched Wake Forest a lot. So because I don't watch a lot of college baseball, I tend to gravitate towards the big name teams, because that's just, where I am in the process. I spend January through April looking at prospects, and I spent April through June looking at Cleveland's prospects, and then July comes around, then I start digging on the draft. So I don't spend as much time on the draft as I normally would like, and I have more the last couple of years. But so 2022, I spent a lot of time watching Tennessee. I like Tennessee guys because I watched, that was the big name that year. And then last year, I watched a ton of Wake Forest, and I got super excited about Brock Wilken, who went to the Brewers, a pick before Cleveland. But I got to see a lot of Nick Kurtz. I liked what I saw there. And the only concern, again, I don't know how good ACC pitching is, truthfully. And I know a lot of people say that their ballpark is kind of a hitter-friendly ballpark where they play games at. My only concern with him is he doesn't have, A, he's a first baseman, which makes it a very risky profile to work out. B, he has not played anywhere outside of college. Like, he's not playing in the Cape. He hasn't played on the Team USA circuit since he was like 12. So Cleveland really tends to like the guys that are performing well in the wood bat leagues or on other high competition circuits. And Kurtz doesn't have any of that. And whenever his season ends in 2024, he's certainly not going to the Cape, I'd imagine, because he might be a top 3 pick. So I don't think he's going to get that there. I don't know if he'll go to the combine, and Cleveland will get a good look at him there and see what happens. But I am enamored with Nick Kurtz. I think the swing is really good. I think he has power to all fields. He walks more than he strikes out. I love all that, but the risk is a first baseman, the bat's got to play. You have nothing to fall back on. That's why I wonder if he can play any left field at all. Number 2, just there's no data outside of college. Like, there's no Cape Cod League data. There's no Team USA data, which is a little bit scary too, I think.
So I ran it. It's kind of funny you mentioned, uh, we'll call it extracurricular competition, either Team USA or the Cape. And I ran a little study because I was just curious about it to see what the success rate for Team USA players, what's the success rate? A, they make it to the big leagues, and B, what type of player they are. And unsurprisingly, the success rates were extraordinarily high. That if a guy had Team USA on his resume, I can't remember the percentages because this was a couple years ago, but it was more often than not they made the big leagues, which is half the battle when you're drafting, right? Because it tends to be such a crapshoot, and guys that were on Team USA twice, it was exponentially higher. And not only that, you're talking more often than not all-star level or caliber production. And I did a quick peruse as I was kind of getting ready for this today. And to the best of my knowledge, it didn't look like there was any guy on Team USA that played last year and the year before. So unfortunately, we don't have that data point kind of to say, hey, this guy, chances are this guy's going to hit. But it's just, I'm a big believer in the Cape. I was up in Massachusetts for work, and I drove the hour or two over to watch the Cape Cod League, and that's when I first saw Justin Dunn in person, and it's an incredible way to watch a game. It's very low key. I was at the Kettlers home field, and it's just carved out in the middle of a neighborhood kind of type of thing, and it's top college competition. Like if you can handle top college competition, chances are you're going to bode very well in the professional ranks.
Yeah, that was a big reason why Cleveland took Chase DeLauder, I feel like, too, is because he had that Cape Cod League success. And the other guy here that we can talk about, we talk about Travis Mazzana, is he has that data point. I don't know where he was. I think he played in the North Woods League, or no, I think he played in some sort of other Pacific League. I'd have to look, but he's also kind of young based on where he's been. But Travis Mazzana won the Cape Cod League MVP last year, and I think he led the league in batting average. I mean, it might have been every offensive. I think he won the Triple Crown out there, if I'm not mistaken. But it was a great season for him, and knock on him as he's a second baseman right now. I don't know where Oregon State's going to play him, but I feel like everything I've read about him to this point makes maybe him the safest pick at 1-1, because unlike Weatherholt, he seems to have a more stable approach. I think he walks a little more than he strikes out right now. At least he walks a little more than Weatherholt does. And he is on the dirt. I don't know where he's going to play, like I said, but he does have the Cape Cod League success in the past, which, like you said, sets him up very well. So I feel like that makes him another guy that is easily, I think anybody would consider him the 1-1 conversation most years. But I feel like that Cape Cod League success does firmly put him in the conversation, at least as of December 12th.
And if I'm looking at it right, he also spent parts of 3 years in the Australian Baseball League as a 15, 16, and 17-year-old, which is just kind of, it's that's pretty noteworthy as well.
Yeah.
But, he does have speed. I wonder if he's a candidate to maybe move out to center field and kind of turn into the opposite Jason Kipnis experiment, because wasn't he a center fielder at was it Arizona State? And then they ended up pulling him in on the dirt. So I wonder if potentially moving him out to center field. He looks like he could potentially move quickly through a system, and we all know the dire need that Cleveland has right now for any type of outfield production, especially in center field. So, that could very well be something that could happen too.
Yeah, definitely could. Okay, so you mentioned Griffin, we mentioned Kurtz, mentioned Mazzana.
Before we move off of Mazzana, I'm also a believer, because I just like little nerdy stats and stuff. They also do have success going into Oklahoma or Oregon State, because that's where Quan came from too.
That's true. And I tend to feel like the Pac-12 is a pretty good baseball conference. I mean, the ACC has produced some good players, I think. But although if you look at the numbers, like looking at Wake Forest specifically, because obviously they had a lot of guys drafted last year, and they're going to have a lot of guys drafted this coming year. But there's not a lot of Wake Forest guys in the big leagues that have really produced. Maybe the program has gotten better over the last handful of years, but you can obviously look at every roster in baseball and point out like some Pac-12 success, including Stephen Kwan.
Yeah, and I was trying to think when we were talking about Kurtz, who's the last impactful bat to come out of Wake, and I'm kind of drawing a blank right now. I know, was it Gavin Sheets? Wasn't he a Wake guy?
That might be the only one. I can't think of anybody else. There just isn't anybody good in the majors right now. I don't think that was there. There was somebody else. I can't think of who it was, but you're right. It might have been Gavin Sheets.
No, I don't. I'm looking. He didn't go to Wake. It had to be Stuart Fairchild.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Wake, yeah, that would be. Yeah, I'm just looking at some players now.
Oh no, Gavin Sheets
rough.
Wake, yeah. But
you did?
Yeah, Gavin Sheets to go to Wake. So again, it's just something to note. I mean, who knows? It takes is one guy to dispel that whole notion.
That's true. That is true. Yeah, Jared. I mean, not for bats, but Jared Schuster's out there. Yeah, Fairchild. Will Craig, who was a first baseman too, by the way. He was announced as a third baseman actually. Not great. I'm looking way down here to see if there's any other hitters, even going back decades, that really worked out in majors. And there is nobody. There's some pitchers, but there's really no history of Wake Forest producing any big time impact bats in the majors. But like you said, you got to look at who's on the board to you now, and every player is an individual. Cleveland did take Tommy Hawk last year from Wake Forest. I will say that. So, and I happen to know the scout from that area for Cleveland. Also was a former co-host of this podcast at one time. So,
yeah. So it's just, again, it doesn't really mean anything. I just find it more fascinating, just from a historical context type of thing.
Now, this is going to change too, because you could tell me how you felt about Paul Skeens this time last year, but I've heard other people say that he wasn't necessarily in position to be 1-1 overall at this time last year. That happened throughout the season. So things could change, but you got to consider the odds. If Cleveland thinks that Chase Burns is the guy at 1-1, I mean, there's certainly a lot of buzz around him. He transferred to Wake Forest, which right now seems to have a good pitching model, a good pitching program there. But I mean, this time a year ago, like I said, most people didn't have Skeens number 1-1 overall. A lot of people thought that Chase Dollander was going to be the first overall pick in the draft, and obviously things didn't go well for him. So a lot can change, but I guess we probably can't count out the possibility of Cleveland looking pitcher number 1 overall based on what they normally do. And college pitchers are generally very safe at 1-1 overall.
So I like Burns quite a bit. And, it's not like he's transferring, from some JUCO or some NAIA school, right? He spent 2 years at Tennessee. So, and he did pretty damn well for at Tennessee, plus fastball, borderline plus with a wipeout slider. That's certainly a pretty strong foundation. He throws strikes. He's more of a strike thrower than a command guy, obviously, but you don't need to be when you're throwing that hard. But we've seen what Cleveland can do with pitching and what they can do with arms and how they develop them. And, how many organizations would you bet on that would be able to get someone like that to take that next step? Maybe Cleveland, Tampa Bay, the Dodgers,
Houston.
Houston. It's a pretty short list. And, like you said, they tend to be safer, and he's coming from, 2 very good programs, right? So it seems to hit a lot.
Although, arguably, I'm not sure. I really have a hard time understanding why Chase Burns transferred to Wake Forest, considering, like you said, we thought Tennessee was a good program, but Dollander took a step back last year, it seems like, and I'm not sure why Burns transferred, so that makes me kind of question things at Tennessee. But Wake Forest, they had Rhett Lauder last year. They had Sean Sullivan taken, Seth Keener. I mean, they had a ton of pitchers taken last year. A lot of the other pitchers too, and this is the same data point. Like you said, it doesn't really necessarily mean anything, but it's interesting that Ryan Cusick and Jared Schuster, who I think both those guys were traded to Oakland, or they were Braves picks traded to Oakland.
Yeah.
Those guys haven't really broken out the major league level, so we haven't really seen a Wake Forest pitcher in a lot of years break free. But they seem to have something going there right now, having all these top picks and getting a guy like Chase Burns to transfer there. So we'll see. But
so
an interesting note.
I never, not to cut you off, I apologize. I know that they were using Burns kind of to piggyback off of Dollander towards the middle to the end of the year, where Dollander would go 4 or 5 innings and they'd bring Burns in after that. So I wonder if if it was that kind of motivated him to look elsewhere. Maybe it's something like that. And I have to admit, I was never, heading into the draft, I was not a huge fan of Dollander's fastball. Like, for what it was supposed to be, it looked awfully hittable based on what I was expecting going into watching him. So that's just, I guess we'll see how that plays out in the coming years.
Well, you could bet whatever happens to him in the pros, it will not be aided by what the Rockies can do with pitching, because they can't do anything. Completely off topic, but I actually really liked the Rockies draft last year. They took a bunch of pitchers I really liked, a lot of players I really liked, and they're probably going to ruin them all because that's the Rockies. They're the Rockies. And I'm very glad we are not Rockies fans or covering the Rockies, because, yeah, I really liked Dollander the year before he was draft eligible, obviously, like everybody did. And I really liked Sean Sullivan last year. I'm trying to think who else they picked, but I like their draft, and I'm just like, cool. They're gonna ruin a bunch of the guys that I really liked in the draft last year. That's good for them. So, sorry, Rockies fans. So yeah, Chase Burns could be in play there. I was fully prepared to go in on, before Cleveland got the number 1 overall pick. I was like, all right, they'll probably pick anywhere between 6 and 10. So I'm like, that's like, Mike Sirota or Vance Honeycutt or Jack Caglione maybe in play there. I'm like, those are all picks that Cleveland could be playing with. I like that little group right there. Now I'm like, okay, well, as much as like Mike Sirota, I can't see Mike Sirota being a 1-1 overall player. Do you
see them taking? I don't see them as fascinated as I am by him. I don't see Cleveland taking Caglione, just because I don't know. It's so hard for me to wrap my mind around them taking a potential 2-way guy, right? Because that's kind of come in vogue, basically since Ohtani broke in. You had the Giants taking, who was it? Reggie Crawford, I think. Yeah, 2 years ago and whatnot. And I don't know. He seems like he could be it's not uncommon to see these college bats kind of take a noticeable step forward between their sophomore and junior years. And I know that there's concerns about Caglione's swing and everything, but he didn't swing and miss that much last year. I think it was about 18%. 18% of the time he struck out. And I don't know. I would be fascinated by him, but I just don't think Cleveland takes that gamble.
It is a gamble. I think you're right. There's probably going to be a lot of conversation around that over the next 7 months because of the Ohtani thing. And Caglione was super fun to watch last year. I mean, Golden Spikes Award semifinalist and hit 33 home runs, and he throws 95 as a left-handed pitcher. Like, that's a lot of fun. Those are a lot of tools.
And I think what separates Ohtani from anybody else, I think Garrett Cole, there was an interview with him, and he said the thing that impressed him most was his ability to recover, right? You can have the potential to be a 2-way guy, and Caglione's doing it in college where they play a few games a week and not every single day. So it's that ability to recover that basically separates Ohtani from everybody else, because he can go out and throw 6 or 7 innings, or 5, 6, 7 innings, throw well, throw hard, and then come back and hit in the middle of the lineup the next day.
Yeah, he is a freak unlike anybody else. There's a reason he's getting, I was going to say it's the reason he's getting $700 million, but really he's getting $20 million, and then it's $680 million for ages 40 to whatever. That whole thing is just mind-boggling right now. I don't have time to get into, but there's a reason he's getting all that money, because he is, I said before, Cleveland likes these unicorn type players that if they do hit, they're superstars, and Jack Caglione certainly could be. I expect a lot of people who are casual baseball fans or don't follow the draft usually, if they're going to be more engaged this year because of Cleveland's pick, to have questions about Caglione because of what he has done in college. And you're absolutely right. When you play, you play Tuesdays and then you play Friday through Sunday, and he might pitch one of those days and hit 3 of them. Whereas, like you said, Ohtani's pitching one day and then he's hitting 5 other days, plus he's hitting the day he pitches. That's a huge difference. Difference.
And I think, not that major league organizations or front offices run their organizations like this, but I think, it's the draft. There's always risk. There is no certain player. There's no definite, I'm going to 100% guarantee this guy's going to be a star type of prospect. There's not. There's guys, the history of the minor leagues are just littered with guys that just busted, that just nobody would have thought so.
Matt Laporta.
Yeah. And but I think it's a lot more understanding if you're standing there and you have the 1 overall pick, and God forbid they swing and miss on it, and you take someone like Jack Caglione and you're like, man, look at the skills, and this is why we went after him. It's explainable. Whereas, you look at Weatherholt and be like, well, he really dominated, the Big 12, and he was a great second baseman, potential shortstop. It's a lot easier to explain away missing, not that the casual fan or anybody would buy into that, or you're the owner either, but, I think it's a little more understandable.
Yeah. I mean, that's how people lose their jobs, right? Is whiffing on stuff like this. And Jack certainly poses a bigger risk to do that. I mean, look, if it works out, yeah, he's a guy who could be a franchise changing talent, but the likelihood that he gets there versus the likelihood that Weatherholt and Bazana reach their ceiling is probably a little better, even if their ceilings are a little bit lower. It's all about probabilities and projections, and this is why Cleveland is a very model-friendly team, because of these projections. It doesn't always work out, especially on the hitting side of things. Obviously, they've done a poor job developing hitters. So I'm very curious to see what they do 1-1 overall if they do decide to go with a position player. But I expect a lot of conversation about Jack. I think for Jack, he's got to throw more strikes. I know a lot of people felt like last year he didn't have great command at times. And I know you said he didn't swing and miss a lot, but he does have, I've read, has a very high chase rate. So for a guy who may not swing and miss a lot, he is still chasing at balls out of the zone. Maybe he's hitting them, I'm not sure, but I know he has a pretty high chase rate, and that's something Cleveland usually doesn't love. But again, they do like these unicorn types, and he certainly could be one of them. It's a lot of tools, but it's a lot of risk, and you're putting your job on the line if you pick a guy like this and it doesn't work out, because as we've seen, Cleveland's never picked number 1 overall in the draft. Even those terrible years in the 70s and the 80s, they never picked number 1 overall. It's the first time in franchise history, which is kind of weird because they were terrible for a long time, and because of the way the draft order was handled, they didn't pick number 1 overall in some of those bad years. But also, since they stopped doing that, Cleveland's never been quite bad enough to pick number 1 overall, which is, a testament to itself as well, especially considering they weren't trying to lose last year. They didn't play well, but they weren't trying to lose, and they still went with a number 1 overall pick, which goes back to our point about the lottery working, is if you got teams who are actually trying to win, even if it didn't work out, they're picking number 1 overall, and that should be rewarded, I suppose, in some ways. But yeah, you potentially got a franchise-changing player in Jack, but there's a lot of good players at the top of this draft, and I'm very curious to see where this goes, and I hope you and I could have more conversations about the draft as the year goes on. If you got any other points in the draft, feel free to throw them in there, but if you've got time, I'd love to still get around to that Rule 5 pick of Deyvion De Los Santos.
Yeah, I think, it kind of involves both here. But I'm sure you saw the stat or whatever is floating around the interwebs or on Twitter or Reddit or something like that. The highest winning percentage among organizations over, the last 10 or 15 years or something like that. And the Guardians ranked, 5th or something, with the 5th highest winning percentage over some ridiculously long window. And I know fans tend to jump on the Dolans and that they don't spend money or whatever, but this is a very well-run organization. I know they swing and miss, like the Nolan Jones thing, in hindsight, that kind of doesn't look great. Potentially the Will Benson thing doesn't look great. The Jake Bowers for Andy Diaz, that one definitely doesn't look great. But they generally, you're making all kinds of moves, throughout the course of a month or a year or whatever. But things always they generally do well on a whole, right? So, I think you got to cut the front office a break, even with the draft coming up, because let's just say they miss on the first pick. They still have, what'd you say, the 36th and the 48th and the 86th.
Mm-hmm.
They're not going to miss it. I don't think they'll miss on all of them, and so I think it's worth, just believing or buying into Antonetti and Chernoff.
Yeah, they generally do put a lot of trust in their draft guys, and they've done very well. Look at the composition of this team. It's mostly draft guys, especially when it comes to pitching. They've got that down to a science. They've got that figured out. But the hitting side, I think they still gotta work on. But this is their chance. I don't know how good this draft is going to be. We'll find out, but they've got a chance to change some narratives and grab some hitters that are good and change things a little bit. And hopefully this is the time they can do it. When it comes to the Rule 5 draft, this is a weird one. I did not expect Cleveland to make a pick at all. Truthfully, if they did, I thought it would be a pitcher because that's normally what they also do. Instead, they picked a 20-year-old third baseman who, I don't know, based on what I've seen, I don't know if he's going to play third base, but a 20-year-old who had 20 home runs last year in Double-A, struck out quite a bit. He made some swing changes in the second half, was a lot better, even though he has a very aggressive profile in terms of, he doesn't strike out a ton for a 20-year-old at Double-A. 26% strikeout rate seems high, but when you talk about a 20-year-old being at Double-A, that's okay. The walk rate being, I think, was like in the 5% range, and in the second half, in the second half, he took off. He made a swing change, and he ended up hitting like 312. I have to find the numbers I had written down. 312, 333, 580 in the second half or from July 1st on, with 13 of his 20 home runs. The first half was pretty bad. It was 208 or 206, 269, 308 with a 26% strikeout rate, slightly higher walk rate. So there is concern there, but I think a lot of people felt like he had the highest upside of any player left unprotected in the Rule 5 draft. I just didn't see Cleveland going this route because he's not the guy we've talked about all night. We've talked about their love for middle infielders who make contact and are solid performers. He is young. He was young for being a Double-A player, so there is that, I guess. But this is not a profile I expected Cleveland to select.
So I looked as you were kind of doing your segue here. He was one of 16 20-year-olds in any Double-A league last year, which is saying something, right? That is, like we were talking before, I mentioned, that is usually the true test for me, is if a guy succeeds in Double-A, especially at a younger level, that's definitely a strong indicator for me, especially at the big league level. On the other hand, the Diamondbacks pushed a lot of right buttons last year in their run. They had an incredibly young team. I think expectations need to be tempered a bit. I saw someone refer, to how popular his pick was or whatever after it was made. 20-year-olds in Double-A that are legitimate prospects typically don't get exposed to the Rule 5 draft, right? So there's things going on here, and the odds of him sticking with Cleveland for the entire year or whatever the time, 90 days, I think, or something like that.
Well, it's 90 days if he's on the injured list for an extended amount of time. There's an exception for that, but if there is no major injury where he would have to spend time on the disabled or injured list, it's got to be the full season. So it's a little more likely to do when you're a pitcher, right?
Yep. So the odds, especially, maybe they can catch lightning in a bottle like they did 2 years ago, and depending how the season plays out, if they win a little more than they're supposed to, the odds of him sticking and becoming part of a numbers crunch, those odds increase where, he may get exposed to not being with the team. But if they're not contending, then they can kind of stick with him longer to see if he can actually hit. But, generally speaking, legitimate potential 20-year-old impact bats at the big league level coming off a season in Double-A, they just don't really get exposed to the Rule 5 draft.
That is true. And I guess this is kind of Cleveland deciding that they bought into the second half adjustments and he was better, and they think he's capable of making those adjustments and getting better with more time with that, especially the way he was trending last year. So they're buying into that. And I know a lot of people will jump and say that, it's a lot like Jenkins and Noel. Why do they need this guy when they have Noel? I think he's better than Noel. I mean, I don't know how you feel about Jenkins and Noel, but I'm personally not super high on him because when you're saying guys who perform well at Double-A level, Jenkins and Noel, especially at the age of 20, Jenkins and Noel doesn't have a run like that at Double-A at age 20 the way De Los Santos does. I will say, on the defensive side of things, from what I've seen, De Los Santos to me looks like a first baseman / DH. I don't think he has the arm for third base. I don't think he has the range either. I think it's a first base only profile. Doesn't run really well. It's a very power heavy dependent profile, but like you said, the performance at age 20 at Double-A is very rare. So I don't think he's anything like Noel in that term. Noel doesn't quite strike out as much as De Los Santos has, and he does walk a little bit more, but I feel like I think De Los Santos gets to a little more power at times, even though I think that his swing decisions are definitely going to need some work.
I think, I'm just working my way through the book this year, and I haven't written about the Diamondbacks, so I haven't done like a full complete dive on it. But as you were kind of talking, and I mean, you're right, like swing decisions, it's obviously plus power for someone to be doing that as a 20-year-old in Double-A. I don't know. I'm just kind of getting like Mikael Franco vibes, right? Like you're talking about a guy that would hit like, I don't know, 250 or 260 with a low on base percentage, and he'd run into, 20 home runs a year or whatever. That's probably his ceiling if everything breaks the right way. But again, the odds of that happening are probably not overly high. Even if we are betting heavily on that second half surge.
Yeah, there's still a lot to clean up there, and making a jump to the major leagues from being a 20-year-old in Double-A to being 21, playing in the majors against the best pitching on earth. He'll be 20. He'll still be 20 actually most of the year. He doesn't turn 21 until June, with late June at that. So he's still going to be playing most of his season next year at age 20, which is wild. So to make that jump from Double-A to the majors, I don't know. It's a very big risk. And like I said, if Cleveland, if it works, then they've got themselves a nice player who can, I don't know, my guess is they'll probably only expose him to lefties in the majors. They'll try to do it that way. And, they've got Jose Ramirez at third base. They don't necessarily need him at third base. They can platoon him with Naylor at first and maybe Kyle Manzardo and work him in that way and see how that works out and try to reduce his exposure. Because what you can do is you try to play him as little as possible without, hurting him, because he still needs the development. So he can't really sit, but you play him in advantageous matchups against lefties and you don't overexpose him. And then the next year at age 21, he could still go down to Triple-A and get some more refinement there, because he's still young. Like, even if this guy sticks the whole year, I would think that unless he really just blossoms out of nowhere, 2025, he could easily be going back to AAA if he sticks in 2024, because he's still going to be 21 years old in 2025.
Yeah, but just, I mean, we were kind of talking, we're both kind of old guys right now, right? I am quite a bit older, but remember, just put your mind frame, if you can put your mind frame around being a 20 or 21-year-old kid. You get called up, and you're not playing, right? And the chances are when he plays, he's probably not going to perform at a high level. So what is that going to do for your mental approach, right? Because he's going to sit, and he's probably going to sit quite a bit because, like you said, unless there's an injury, God forbid, to J Ram, third base, he's not going to see a lot of time there. And even if he does, he's really not a third baseman. And, everybody's hoping that Naylor can have a repeat performance and stay healthy for the full year. And, obviously everybody's aware of what Manzardo did in the Arizona Fall League. Those guys are going to be seeing the lion's share of time at first base and in DH, you have to imagine. So he's going to end up sitting. And how is that going to affect him mentally? I don't think I'm a big believer on the mental side of the game, and I don't think it gets talked about enough because there's a certain level of mental fortitude you have, and it's going to take a special 20-year-old kid, 21-year-old kid to come and sit, still try to continue to develop and not actually get playing time.
That's a great point. Yeah. I mean, hiding guys at the major league level, like, Cleveland was able to hide Trevor Stephan a little bit in 2021, and then 2022 he had a breakout. But when you're a reliever, it's a whole lot different because you can pitch him in mop-up duty, and he was older. Well, he wasn't 20. Yeah. He was like 25, 26 as a Rule 5 pick. This kid, you're right, he's 20. I was an idiot at 20, and I didn't know what I thought about anything at age 20. I still don't know. It's going to be a lot harder for him to process all this, and in a brand new organization with brand new voices in his ear. It's a lot to process. So, yeah, essentially the deck is really stacked against him. So it's an interesting pick. In all those ways you talked about. The mental side of it's very hard because even let's say he even stays on Cleveland's roster all of 2024, right? Let's say that they keep him, and you're likely to option him down in 2025 at age 21 to AAA. Like, that's still not a great confidence thing for him, and he's got to go through all 2024 not getting a lot of development and not playing well, like you said, most likely, and he's got to rebuild his confidence the next year, and he's going to AAA. And it's like, great, I was just in the majors last year. Now I'm in AAA. Like, there are all kinds of mental hurdles here for him to clear, not just the fact that he's got to work on swing decisions and if he can improve at all at third base defensively and everything else, hitting major league pitching so hard. There are no Garrett Coles. There are no Pablo Lopez's in AAA or even AA. So you might face those guys on their way up as prospects, but there's no substitute for facing those guys in the majors. So it's hard, and there could be long-lasting effects. This is why I think Cleveland in the past has studied like players' reactions to being called up, like mentally, like doing surveys with them, mental health surveys about when they're called up and why they call players up, mostly when they're performing well in the minors, if they can help it. Like, you're right, the mental side is a huge part of this, and I don't know how it's going to work out, but I don't know, it's just weird because, like you said, maybe if everything goes well, he's Michael Franco, and that's an okay player, but there's a reason that guy was non-tendered by Philadelphia and wound up on a very bad Kansas City Royals team. So it's a peculiar pick at the best.
So because like I said, I'm old and I'm drawing a blank. Who was the guy that Pirates, the right-handed hurler that the Pirates grabbed from us in the Rule 5 draft a couple years ago, kind of bounced back and forth?
Luis Oviedo, yeah.
Yes. Yeah. How did that, you know what I mean? Like, that guy was...
He stuck the whole year.
Yeah. But what happened after that, right? Like...
He still got let go, yeah.
I guess what I'm saying is he's not better for that, right? Like, he wasn't better for sticking with the whole year and everything like that. Like, I don't know. Sometimes you hit on lottery tickets, right? And that's all De Los Santos is. And but I think expectations need to be tempered significantly.
It would be ironic. Yeah, I'm definitely keeping them tempered. I mean, you had a number 5 overall in your book last year, but that also doesn't assume that he could play in the majors at age 20 the next year. Like, that was last year in springtime, so that doesn't assume he can make that jump, obviously. But it would be ironic if they took De Los Santos in the draft, because we don't know what they're going to do with Manzardo, right, in terms of service time games and all that kind of stuff. They really should not keep him in AAA to start the year if there's any chance that he can win Rookie of the Year and give him an extra pick. But it would be really ironic if they drafted De Los Santos to put to DH and put in play first with Naylor, to keep Kyle Manzardo in AAA until they can manipulate some service time, because Manzardo's probably ready to go day one, and De Los Santos definitely is not ready to go day one unless they just completely, like you said, hit lightning in a bottle here.
And I think it's also important, to provide some context on Arizona's farm system. They're very, heading into the year, they were very top end heavy. You had Corbin Carroll, Lawler, Drew Jones, and I had Brandon Pfaadt 1 through 4. And then I had De Los Santos 5. But after 4, there's a pretty big drop off in terms of prospect hype, I guess. Like you have De Los Santos, and then you had guys like Jorge Barosa and Blake Walston and stuff like that. So sure, he was number 5 in their system, but there was a pretty big drop off after those first 4.
Yeah, there sure were, and that's going to be the case for Cleveland too. I'm not really sure. I haven't really dove into where I would rank De Los Santos in Cleveland's system, but it's certainly not going to be top 5. That still speaks to Cleveland's system a little bit, but also just where he's at. And I guess it's a good thing he wouldn't be number 1 or number 2 or even number 5 in the system. But at the same time, doesn't mean he can play in the major. So it's going to be very strange. I'm not sure what they're going to do.
And I will say this one kind of final thought. I think Stephen Vogt, I think he is the ideal manager. I was a huge fan of them bringing him in. And if there was a guy that could, I don't know him. I followed his career pretty closely because I think it was an interesting kind of career arc. And I think, based on what everybody's saying about him, his former teammates and everything, if there was a guy that could make it work with De Los Santos, I'm just saying, I think it might be Vogt.
Yeah, it definitely speaks to, his career being what it was, being an underdog, and the odds kind of stacked against him having the career that he did. You're right. He could definitely relate a lot to that, to De Los Santos. I don't know how good De Los Santos's English is and what the gap on that might be, but
that also just might be a little bit of homerism and my own fanboyism, hoping for the best.
Yeah, no, I don't think that's unfair to say. You're right. That is the key part of any manager is relating to your players. And Vogt was never a top 5 prospect in anyone's system, but De Los Santos has long odds to stick in the majors, and so did Vogt. So there is that bit of relatability that certainly helps. So one thing I wouldn't rule out, and I'm not saying this is going to happen, I don't have any inside information on this, but it does happen. It usually happens the time of the draft and not after, but there is a chance that Cleveland trades something to Arizona to release the Rule 5 protections on De Los Santos. You can take that restriction off by trading something to Arizona and agreeing that, hey, we won't take him back if you option him down, if you trade us whoever. So maybe they can work out a trade where they can send something to Arizona and then take the Rule 5 restrictions off of De Los Santos, option to AAA, and have a more traditional path with him going forward. Like I said, I don't know if there's anything like that in the works, but there is that possibility there that, would make a lot more sense for this pick if Cleveland felt like they were close. Arizona does need bullpen help. Cleveland might have some guys to trade. I don't know.
And I feel like doesn't that type of stuff usually happen right around the end of spring training? You kind of get a good feel. I may be way off, but I feel like that just kind of tends to happen around the end of spring training. You get guys that you get a pretty good sense if they're going to hack it or not, no pun intended, at the big league level. and they may like him enough to just say, hey, you can have one of our 3,000 middle infielders and we'll call it a deal.
No, you're right. That's true. Usually Rule 5 picks get traded the day of the draft, but not necessarily.
I got
dropping they're not dropping their protection the day of the draft, but you're right. In spring training, if there's a guy they think will or will not stick, depending on how bad they want him, you're right. They get an idea what he can do in spring training. And if they really want him, they can try to work out a trade. And that you're right. That might come towards spring training when you get a better idea of how things are going to go there. So that might not be resolved anytime soon. That we may have to wait until March to see if Cleveland really wants to keep him and if there's any kind of deal that can be reached. All right, well, Joe, I've kept you quite late here. We've gone pretty long on a lot of topics. This was a lot of fun. Loved your insights in the draft and all the history, and throwing Connor Griffin in there makes a ton of sense. Definitely a guy to keep an eye on and think about things going forward. And appreciate your insight on De Los Santos, because you cover all 30 teams in your book. The 2023, you can still get the 2023 Prospect Digest Handbook on Amazon. And Joe, you said 2024 there is going to be a book, but this is number 10 and the final one.
There's a good possibility. I know my wife is kind of rooting quietly that this is the last one. She supported me for the majority, she's always supported me. She hasn't been around for all 10, but I think 10's kind of run its course, and there's other things in baseball I like to focus in on in terms of writing and whatnot.
Totally fair. Well, when book number 10 comes out, please let me know, because I will pre-order on Amazon. I always do. Like I said, I think I've got at least 2 other ones in my my bookcase over there with my Baseball Prospectus Annual and my Baseball America Handbook every year. I collect them all and read everyone else's thoughts. And, I give you a lot of credit for being a self-published author and how much work you put into this, because it's something I would love to do, but I know I don't have the time and the depth to do it. So trust me when I say I definitely appreciate what you do. And I think it's a great thing. And I'm looking forward to book number 10, even if it is the last. And I encourage you, if you're listening to this, to look out for Joe's link for book number 10 at Jolt and Joey on Twitter, and Prospect Digest Handbook on Amazon. Definitely look for that.
Well, thanks for having me on. I think we chatted for about, an hour and a half, but it only seems about 10 minutes. I really enjoyed it. Yeah,
I did too. Hopefully, if you have some time between your writing the last book here, if you have more time to come on, I'd love to have you back. I hope people enjoyed this. I definitely enjoyed chatting with you. And like I said, a lot more in the draft than I do. And would love to get your thoughts again as the year goes on, when we debate more about what's going to happen at this first overall pick.
Yeah. And I got to be honest, this is the perfect excuse on why to take a break from writing. So I'm always looking for an excuse to take the night off and chat baseball. All
right. Well, we will do that again then, hopefully. And as I said, with the Guardians of the Future podcast, hard to record these things when I'm doing Locked On Guardians 5 days a week. But when there is big news, obviously like this, I will find a way to record podcasts like this, and hopefully have guests like Joe in the future. And when the next time any news breaks on the Guardians minor league system, if there's a trade or an addition of some prospect or getting closer to spring training, we'll be back on, and hopefully we'll have Joe on again. Thank you all for listening and downloading, rating, reviewing. All that stuff helps. This is an independent podcast versus what the podcast is on Locked On Guardians. So any support we do appreciate. Check out the Next Year in Cleveland newsletter. I'll link all that here in the show description. But thank you for all your support. Thanks to Joe for joining me today. And let's be excited for July. I know it's a long way off, but excited for that number 1 overall pick for the Guardians. Stay tuned for more.